So this may be a bit premature as they are confirmed to be getting a Codex at some point, but it has been mentioned by GW that the new Imperial Knight Codex is still quite a ways out. And to me, with things like the new Heresy, the Old World, not to mention all the stuff we've already got confirmed to be coming for AOS and 40k in the near future, I personally wouldn't be surprised if we don't see the new Imperial Knight Codex until September at the earliest, if not a bit later. And so I thought with the recent update to their index, which came out a couple of days ago, we would do a video going through those changes, their detachments, their datasheets, and do their faction review just a little bit early. Now, I will still be doing a full review when their codex does come out, and I am also still planning to do one for the Chaos Knights and the Space Wolves as soon as I can, but as an Imperial Knight player myself, this one was quite exciting to me, so I just wanted to get it done as soon as I saw these updates. And so without any further ado, let's dive in to the new and updated and in some ways improved Imperial Knights Index. And where better to start than with their army rule of the Code Chivalric. This is a really fun, fluffy, and actually quite powerful rule that allows you to pick an oath to complete over the course of the game, and you get an associated ability for the game, and then a further buff for your army once your oath or your deed is completed. So you have a choice of either Lay Low the Tyrant or Reclaim the Realm. Lay Low the Tyrant requires you to destroy the enemy warlord as your deed, and brings you a very strong buff which grants each unit in your army the ability to reroll 1 hit and 1 wound roll whenever they shoot or fight. So just giving your limited models in your army so much more reliability in making sure that their attacks count when you really need them to. The deed isn't a bad one either. Having to kill the enemy warlord is likely something that you'll be wanting to do anyway over the course of the game, so it is just a fairly straightforward, pretty easy one to be going after. The other option, Reclaim the Realm, grants your units +1 to their movement and also +1 to advance and charge rolls, so if you want to get more mobility in your army and just get into combat quicker, this one could be worth it. Generally, however, I prefer the reliability of Lay Low the Tyrant most of the time. The deed for Reclaim the Realm, if you choose that one, requires you to control 1 or more objective markers in the enemy deployment zone. So once again, I don't think it's one that's outrageously difficult. You will be wanting to try and get this and get into the enemy deployment and control their objectives anyway in most games. So it is definitely something that you will be shooting and trying to do. It won't really impact or alter your game plan that much. So it's not particularly challenging, but I do think that in some cases it could be a little bit harder than just going after the enemy warlord and trying to kill them. So overall, I think Lay Low the Tyrant is generally the better option. But in either case, when you have achieved your deed, you get the extra buff I mentioned, and that is that at the start of your command phase, once your deed has been achieved, you become honoured, and you just gain a flat 3 command points. Which is a huge bonus. It can, in that turn when you get your deed and then go into your command phase and get those 3 extra command points, give you a seriously big leg up. You know, if this is done in turn 2 or 3, when you're just about to go into combats and get a load of shooting and fighting done, and you want to really supercharge your units and your army as much as possible, you've essentially got a really big pool of extra command points to blitz through some stratagems and just absolutely overwhelm the enemy with all the tricks and shenanigans you can do. So it's a really nice boost to your utility and your output. And if you get it in the right turn and get those 3 command points in the right turn when you really need to use all of the strats you have available to you, it can absolutely swing a game back into your favor. The army rule also mentions your bondsman abilities. These are rules on your big Questoris knights, and they get to use these in your command phase, and you pick essentially a friendly Armiger model within 12 inches of one of your knights, and they get a buff that is part of the bondsman abilities. Now, as we'll see, some of these are very strong, and they can massively improve the output or the utility or the sheer survivability of your smaller Armiger knights. Finally, you also get some rules around how big models like your knights actually work. So you get the super heavy walker, which states you can move through models and terrain that are less than 4 inches in height. You can also move through engagement range with these moves, but you can't end the move in engagement range, so you can't just move into combat. Also says that you can move through terrain features that are over 4 inches in height, but if you do that, you have to roll a d6, and on a 1 you are battle shocked. So you have a bit more flexibility in how you move around the board and get around terrain and that sort of thing, but there can be a risk associated with it if you decide to just barge through a building, for instance. Finally, you also get the Free Blades rule. This just explains how you bring knights in other Imperium factions. So you can bring 1 Titanic Knight or 3 Armiger models if your army has the Imperium keyword on all its other units, but your knight units can't be your warlord, and you also can't give them any of the enhancements. Overall, it's actually some fairly good thematic and strong army rules. I love the Code Chivalric buffs. They make your army much more threatening, especially with the Lay Low the Tyrant buff and the reliability from that. The Bondsman abilities are a great way to get the most out of your smaller knights as well, as they are charging up the board and supporting your bigger knights. So it's just a really great way to run this army and get some much needed reliability from your small model count. In terms of the detachments, the knights only have 2 for now, although they will certainly get more in their main codex when that comes out. But as it stands, we currently have the Noble Lance, which is very straightforward but very, very powerful. The rule of that is Indomitable Heroes, and this gives all of your knight models a 6-up Feel No Pain, which goes to a 5-up Feel No Pain when you are honoured. So having just a few really, really tough models in your army with a load of wounds, Feel No Pain can actually go a long, long way. And even just the base 6-up Feel No Pain can essentially mean the equivalent of an extra 4 or 5 wounds on things like your Dominus Knights, which is quite a significant detachment bonus. It doesn't do anything else, but just making you more survivable is incredibly handy, and it can also really help to mitigate the fact that your invulnerable saves on your knights are only against shooting attacks. So even when you are locked up in combat and in melee, you do have that backup Feel No Pain to rely on. The detachment also has a healthy 5 enhancements as well to take advantage of, ranging from 15 to I think 40 points, although I might be wrong on that. But in any case, Revered Knight is the first at 15 points. It's an aura which gives friendly models within 6 inches of the bearer +1 to their leadership. And this aura goes to 12 inches if your army is honoured. So it's not bad, but it's hardly the most exciting enhancement. You do have fairly solid leadership across the board anyway, so this isn't one that I personally would be picking first. But maybe if you finished list building and you've got a spare 15 points to throw around, that could be a good way to spend them. Mythic Hero is much, much better. This is 25 points and it can go on a Questoris Knight only. It allows you to pick an extra Armiger unit to give a Bondsman ability. So you can pick 2 Armigers within 12 inches of the bearer and they each get the associated Bondsman buff, which can be really, really strong. As I said, some of your Bondsman abilities are incredibly good, so essentially getting twice as much use out of them can really, really supercharge your low model count army in a very impactful way. Mysterious Guardian is up next. This is also 25 points. This one hilariously gives the bearer Deep Strike, and it also lets them once per battle do some uppy downy tricks if they're not in combat. So it lets you go back into reserves at the end of an enemy turn and then come back in your following movement phase 9 inches from enemies. Now this can be, if nothing else, a huge threatening tool. Dropping a knight 9 inches from enemies in their backfield to threaten a flank with some charges or just put a load of shooting down near to them can really, really worry an opponent. It can also be used quite nicely to help you complete some of your deeds, getting you line of sight on the enemy warlord that was hidden, for instance, or just onto an exposed objective can be a really good way to use this just to get your deed completed and unlock the extra buffs for your army. So I think it's a really strong, really powerful tool for just 25 points. At 30 points, the Banner of Macarius Triumphant gives you the fantastically handy sticky objective rule, which for a low model count army like the Knight can be a lifesaver. It lets your units just take an objective and keep hold of it, even when they have then moved off to throw some firepower or even get some charges into another enemy unit in a subsequent turn. So it's not super, super flashy, and as I said, it is quite pricey at 30 points, but for an army like Knights, it absolutely can be the difference between winning and losing when it comes to getting those primary points by being on objectives. The final enhancement is Unyielding Paragon. This one actually doesn't have any points in the Munitorium Field Manual, but I believe from reading around on Reddit and other forums, I believe it's 40 points Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 40 points. So it is expensive, but it's also incredibly strong. It can go on a Questoris model, and it gives them essentially permanent armor of contempt. It lets you ignore a pip of AP from any incoming attacks. Now, this isn't quite the equivalent of a 2-up save, but it does mean you are much more resilient against any AP1 or AP2 attacks that are coming your way, so it can make a huge difference to, if nothing else, just the amount of chip damage you will be taking, which on top of the feel no pain from your detachment rule, makes your knights unbelievably resilient to enemy firepower. So again, it is quite pricey, but if you want a knight to be as survivable as possible, it's very much worth putting on them. Now onto the stratagem front, we do have 6 fairly solid picks. Shoulder the Burden is the first of 3 2 command point stratagems, so you will really love the 3 command points you get for completing your deed, because this can be quite a command point heavy detachment. This goes on a knight in your command phase that has lost any wounds, and until your next command phase, they get +1 movement, toughness, save, leadership, objective control, and also +1 to hit. Now you can only use it once per battle, or you can use it a second time if you are honoured, but this is so good. Boosting a knight back to toughness 12, giving them a 2-up save, as well as improving their objective control and their accuracy and everything, can make even an injured knight much more terrifying than it was at full health. It can be a really nice threat to make your opponent not really want to put any chip damage into your knights either, because they will know that if they don't manage to wipe a knight out in one go, you can use this and you will essentially just have an even stronger knight to throw more damage back into them in retaliation. Thunderstomp is a returning classic, is done in the fight phase, and this lets a knight that hasn't fought yet gain devastating wounds on its melee weapons. Now you can't target vehicles or monsters with this, but if you are being bogged down by a load of gaunts or guardsmen, or even something stronger like a unit of custodian wardens, this can be an amazing way to make sure your attacks just cleave through as many enemy models as possible and get rid of all those pesky flies that are around your feet. Another returning favourite is Rotate Ion Shields. This is a very good durability buff. For just 1 command point, this is done in the enemy shooting phase. It improves your invuln save from a 5-up to a 4+. And it does last for the whole phase, so it can keep a knight protected from a lot of enemy shooting. If your opponent has got a Gladiator Lancer or a Tyrannofex or something lining up to shoot at one of your knights, this is a strat you will be very glad to have ready to go, just to keep your important units alive as long as possible. Another one for just 1 command point is Squire's Duty. This is done at the start of your shooting or fight phase, and you can pick 2 or more Armiger models in your army and 1 eligible enemy target. And then for the phase, all of your Armiger models that you select get +1 strength and AP, and also +1 damage if you are honoured. This is, in my opinion, insanely good. It can get your Helverins up to strength 10, -2 AP, and potentially 4 damage, which with 8 shots each means you will have at minimum 16 shots going into a target with that profile, because you have to pick at least 2 Armiger models. Likewise, in the fight phase, this can boost your Armiger Warglaives to strength 11, -4 AP, and 4 damage, which makes them a huge threat into even the toughest enemy units. And it is just all round a fantastic stratagem for 1 command point. It's one that I can see you using a lot if you are running quite a few Armigers in your armies. The final 2 stratagems are both 2 command points. Trophy Claim is in the shooting or the fight phase. It allows an Imperial Knight model to pick an enemy monster or vehicle unit, and for that phase, your knight gets +1 to wound. And if you destroy that enemy unit that you targeted, you get a command point back. So you can use this, and it essentially will only cost you 1 command point, but there is a downside. If you don't manage to destroy the enemy unit that you selected with that knight model that you put this strat on, you instead can't use this strat again for the rest of the game. So you do have to be careful, and you have to make sure that you definitely will be able to kill your target, maybe going into it or going into an enemy vehicle that's already been damaged in an earlier turn or something, or just making sure, in your head that your knight will have enough firepower or melee output to actually kill the target. Essentially though, if you know that, this can be seen as just a very nice, simple +1 to wound. So it is a really great, strong tool. It is just one you need to be quite careful with and don't go overboard. Don't try and take down another full health knight or something with this, because chances are you won't be able to, and then you will just lose this strat for the rest of the game. Finally, Valiant Last Stand is also 2 command points. This is in the fight phase. It allows a knight model that was destroyed but hadn't fought yet to fight before you roll for deadly demise. Now, you only count as having 1 wound, so you will be rolling your attacks with the damaged profile, but this can get a guaranteed set of swings into a nasty enemy unit that has killed you to try and get some revenge into them. So it can be a very good deterrent for enemy Death Stars going into your knights because they might not want to get hit back in return. You do also get to roll Deadly Demise after this, so even if you use this strat and don't manage to kill the enemy that went into you, you could get lucky and then explode and do a few extra mortals into them on top of your melee damage that you do. It is pricey, as I said, but it can be a really, really strong deterrent for enemy melee units, because if they know you have this in your back pocket, even if they kill you before you can fight, they will know that you will likely kill a few of their precious models in return before you remove your knight from the table. The Imperial Knights did also get a Grotmus detachment, the Questor Forgepact. It's generally considered to be not really worth it over the Noble Lance, but if you like running some AdMech stuff with your knights, it may be one that you want to try from a fluff point of view. The detachment rule is Cogbound Alliance, which gives your knights the Sacristan Pledge rule, letting you in your command phase restore 1 wound to a model in your army, or D3 wounds if your chosen knight unit is within 3 inches of a tech priest model. And then the AdMech units in your army get the Divine Inspiration rule, which means that they can reroll hit rolls of 1 with ranged attacks, and also reroll wound rolls of 1 if they are within 6 inches of any Imperial Knights. So it's just a nice bit of combo play, giving your knights a bit more durability and your AdMech units a bit more ranged damage output, which is nice. I don't think, as I said, it's as good as the buffs from Noble Lance personally, but as I said, it is a nice mixture of knights and AdMech, so if you like that style of army, it is some fairly nice buffs for both parts of that army. As you'd expect, the detachment does also allow you to bring AdMech units in your army, or else it wouldn't really work, so you can bring up to 250 points in an incursion size game, all the way up to 750 points in an onslaught game, so you are still going to be mostly knights, but you will have a few extra bodies to throw onto the table as well. The enhancements go from 15 points to 35 points, with one of them being Tech Priest only, while the rest are for your knights. And Omniscion Champion is first, it is 30 points, and it gives your knight 4 extra wounds, which is kind of crazy. It puts a Dominus Knight up to 32 wounds, which alongside the heal you can do each battle round, can just make your knights absurdly difficult to get rid of. Knight of the Opus Machina is 20 points. This one also goes on a knight, giving the bearer reroll hit rolls of 1 on their ranged attacks if they are within 6 inches of an AdMech unit. So essentially spreading the detachment buff to your knight and its allies when they're close to each other, which can be really, really handy for making your big scary guns hit as often as possible alongside the AdMech's guns, which will also be re-rolling ones to hit. Magos Questoris is the 35 point option. This goes on your tech priests. It gives the bearer not only the lone operative rule when they are within 3 inches of a knight, which is already brilliant for keeping him alive, it also brings a second heal to the detachment. He can pick a knight model within 3 inches, and it regains up to 2 wounds. So yes, he can potentially heal up to 5 wounds on a knight next to him, 2 from his enhancement, and then up to 3 from the detachment rule. So he can quite easily pay for his own cost in just a few turns, which is pretty amazing. And he will, if nothing else, definitely help to keep one of your knights stomping around the board for a long, long time. I think my main issue with this is that he is of course much slower than your knights, so actually keeping up with them will be something you'll need to plan around so you don't lose not only his lone operative ability where he has to be within 3 inches, but also he needs to be within 3 inches to actually heal up the knight, so he will have to probably be advancing most of the game just to stay up to the knight so he can keep healing them back up. Finally, the Voxifer Magnificent is a 15 point aura for your knights. This lets them reduce enemy leadership by 1 when they are within 6 inches, and also improve the leadership of your AdMech units by 1 when they are within 6 inches. So once again, it's not bad. It can help you force some battle shock failures onto the enemy, but really it's one I would only go for if, again, I had that spare 15 points and nothing else to spend it on. I just think the other options in this detachment are better overall. Onto the stratagems. Unlike the Noble Lance, these are all just one command point, so it is a much less command point intensive stratagem. But we begin with Omnissiah's Grace, which gives a knight or admech unit in your army a 5-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds. So you do this just after any mortal wounds are allocated to a unit, and it can actually go quite a long way to help keeping your units alive, especially things like knights, which are particularly vulnerable to a lot of mortal wound output. It's not a total defense by any stretch, but it can really help out in a pinch against some armies like Eldari or Tyranids that can spam a lot of mortals. Machine Focus gives a knight from your army in your command phase the ability to ignore any weapon or ballistic skill modifiers or any modifiers to hit or wound rolls. So anything like stealth or the -1 to wound rolls from the new Dark Angels detachment, you will still be hitting and wounding like normal. That can be so important on your knights, where even just dropping their ability to hit or wound by 1 can really impact how much damage they can actually do thanks to their low model count. So this can be super key on things like your Volcano Lances or your Thermal Cannons, when you just need absolutely every single hit to get through and every single wound to get through. Next up, we have Vengeance of the Machine Cult. This is done in any phase, and when a knight unit from your army is destroyed, the enemy unit that destroyed it is marked for the rest of the battle, and then your admech units get lethal hits against that target for the entire battle. So getting you some very welcome revenge if an enemy unit destroyed a hallowed knight. And lethal hits can actually be quite useful on a lot of the admech weaponry, which does tend to have a good volume but quite weak firepower, so getting those auto wounds can actually be quite significant in terms of improving your output with those models. Aggression Begets Aggression is done in your shooting phase and goes on a knight or a knight character, so one of your bigger knights, and also an admech unit that is within 6 inches of that character unit, and they gain assault on their weapons, so giving something like a Questoris knight and an admech unit essentially an extra d6 inches of movement, or something like an Armiger Helverin, just a bit of extra range on their autocannons if they need to shoot at something that's really far on the other side of the board. It's not a bad stratagem, but I think it's one of the weaker ones here. Just giving assault for 1 command point is nice, but I think there's generally better ways to spend a command point. And Bonded Imperative is one such ability. This gives a character knight unit that is about to use its bondsman ability the power to use it on an admech unit instead of an armiger. So potentially giving an admech unit something like reroll hits in melee if they're about to charge in, or even +1 to hit if you are about to shoot into an important target. Now, it's not always going to be better to put it on an admech unit over an armiger, but sometimes it really will pay off. So being able to do that for a command point when you need to is really useful. The final stratagem is Thronegeist Fury. This is done in the enemy movement phase after an enemy unit is set up or ends a normal advance or fall back move, and a Titanic unit from your army within 24 inches of that enemy unit can shoot with one of their weapons. This is essentially a strat to give you back Overwatch, because you can't normally use that on Titanic units. So you do only hit on 6s, but on some of your big knights that can be a very scary threat, and overwatching with something like the Valiant's Conflagration Cannon can be a huge threat that will absolutely make your opponent reluctant to move out enemy units, lest they take 3d6 auto-hitting attacks on their unit of Marines that's just moved up. So it is just one of those abilities where just the sheer threat of it is where the real power lies. It absolutely can help you control the enemy movement and stop them getting onto objectives or going where they want to be, and that will of course really help you win games. So it's not a bad detachment, honestly, it's just not as good as the Noble Lance, I don't think. I do like the extra durability of the Feel No Pain that the Noble Lance brings, and I just think the strats in general seem to be a bit more useful. Yes, it is definitely more command point heavy, but as a more all well-rounded detachment, I just think it is honestly far superior. However, from the detachments, it is time to look at the actual datasheets, and there are quite a few. There is a lot of Forge World or Imperial armor choices as well, and in addition to the update that we got the other day, there are quite a few changes to talk about. All of the knights, or at least most of the knights, are now significantly cheaper, but they have also dropped in toughness in line with the Chaos Knights, so it is a tiny bit more of a spammable army, but don't let that phrase fool you, it is still a very, very elite, very low model count force. First up on the actual index units, the Armiger Helverin is the ranged option for your smaller shooty knights. This fella is just 130 points, and for that you get a toughness 9, 12-inch move model with a 3-up save, 14 wounds, and a 5-up in-run. This is a notable drop from the old toughness 10 it had before, and I know a lot of people will miss that, but it has gone from 12 wounds to 14, which is nice. However, there have also been some other nerfs. It did get a significant drop to its OC from 8 down to 6, which does hurt it quite a lot. It's now a lot harder for it to keep and hold objectives. On top of that, the bracketing also got worse. They now get -1 to hit when they have 5 wounds left instead of just 4. And also when they are bracketed, they have to halve their OC. So now when a Helverin is injured, they could be down to OC of 3 rather than their old value of 8. So that does honestly have quite a significant impact on their usefulness in games. Aside from that though, their weapons didn't change. The autocannon is still 4 shots, 48 inches at strength 9, -1 AP and 3 damage, and they get 2 of them. So that's 8 shots in total, which is very nice for some long range fire support. Any fly units on the table that the enemy had will really suffer because the Helverins also get the Skyfire Protocol rule, which means your Helverins will be wounding them on 2s if your Helverins are on an objective marker you control or wholly within your deployment zone. You do also get some token shooting from the Melter Gun or the Heavy Stubber that you can take, but you really don't want these guys in combat. They've only got 4 strength 6 attacks that are 0 AP and 1 damage, so they just will not do well at all if an enemy unit tries to get them in combat to tie them down. What is a more melee focused version of the Armigers is the Warglaive. This variant is 140 points, and instead of the autocannons, it has a thermal spear and a Reaper chain cleaver. It's the same stat line with a 12-inch move, toughness 9, 3-up save, 14 wounds. It's also got the same drop in OC as the Helverin, but with the Warglaive, you can actually do some fairly good anti-tank work with the thermal spear. It gives you 2 shots at strength 12, -4 AP and D6 damage with the Melter 4 rule, so you can get quite a lot of damage into the enemy. It has, however, had a bit of a nerf in that the range of the thermal spear has gone down from 24 inches to just 18. So now your melter range is only 9 inches, and that means this guy can't quite as easily get that extra 4 damage into targets. So that is a pain. It does, as I said, make it just that little bit trickier to get the most out of it, but still, it is a potential 20 damage from the thermal spear alone. So when you do get close, it can potentially add up to quite a lot of damage into enemy vehicles and tanks and that sort of thing. So you do really want this thing to be charging up the board and getting near to the enemy. And once you've done that, the Warglaive is also much better in melee than the Helverin. It's got both a strike and a sweep profile with the chain cleaver. It's either 4 strength 10 attacks at -3 AP and 3 damage, or if you need to clear some hordes, you can instead opt for 8 strength 8 attacks at -2 AP and 1 damage. You also get sustained hits when you charge, so sustained hits in melee with the rule Impetuous Glory. So that does actually make it quite a scary prospect into a lot of targets, from enemy light tanks to monsters to elites like Terminators, even chaff units like Guardsmen. They will fall down quite quickly to the sweep profile, especially if you've made a charge that turn. Now onto the bigger knights, the Questoris knights. To avoid repeating myself constantly, I will just say all of the Questoris pattern have had a few changes and they have a few things in common in their profile. They are all a 10-inch move, toughness 11, which has dropped down from 12, but they are now 26 wounds up from 22 to balance that out. They do still have the standard 3-up save, 5-up in-run against ranged attacks, and a fairly healthy OC of 10 to help you try and take objectives from your opponent. They do all also get a choice of carapace weapons in the form of an Iron Storm missile pod, which is D6 plus 1 shots, strength 5, 0 AP, 1 damage with indirect fire and blast, an Icarus autocannon for some twin-linked anti-fly shooting, 3 shots at 48 inches, which are strength 7, -1 AP and 2 damage, and then my personal favourite, which is the Storm Spear rocket pod. This grants you 3 shots at 48 inches, which are strength 8, -2 AP, and D6 damage. So I like putting that on just to get some extra pot shots into enemy elites, or even trying to push that D6 damage through onto some lighter vehicles in a pinch. Now the first Questor Knight we have is the Paladin. This is pretty much the standard go-to option, and it costs you now 345 points, which is a whopping 60 point drop from where it was just a few days ago. The Paladin comes stock with a rapid fire battle cannon and then either a Reaper chainsword or a Thunderstrike gauntlet. The battle cannon is actually pretty damn scary. It's firing at D6 plus 3 shots at 72 inches, but it also has rapid fire D6 plus 3, so at an enemy 36 inches away, you are now looking at 2d6 plus 6 shots, and with blast, this can really stack up quickly. In total, you could be putting up to 22 shots into a 20 strong glob of orc boys if they were your only target. The other stats of the cannon though are strength 10, -1 AP and 3 damage, so whilst it does have fairly mediocre AP, it's got pretty good strength and pretty good damage, and within 36 inches, this gun can expect to kill about 3 Terminators if it fires into a unit of 10, so it's not the most amazing for its cost, but it certainly does do some work from a relatively safe distance. And it can actually be really effective into those light toughness 9, even toughness 10 vehicles, just from the sheer weight of shots it can put out. That 3 damage can really start to add up quickly. In melee, the chainsword or the gauntlet are both very viable options. Of course, both are equally scary in some ways. The chainsword is either 4 attacks at strength 14, -4 AP, 6 damage, and then it has a sweep profile for 12 attacks at strength 9, -3 AP and 2 damage. The gauntlet is for even tougher targets though. It's 4 attacks at strength 20, -3 AP and 8 damage, or instead 8 attacks at strength 10, -2 AP, 3 damage. So it's got less AP, but higher strength and more damage. So if you are expecting to fight toughness 5 units like Terminators, or some really big scary monsters that may have an invulnerable save, then I would say the gauntlet is probably better. But both can be very viable. They both hit on 3s, which is really nice, and to be honest, they are both going to do a lot of damage into whatever they go into, whether you take the sword or the fist. In terms of rules, the Paladin comes with Seasoned Noble, which allows you to reroll a hit, a wound, or a saving throw once per phase. This is really good because it stacks with your army rule, and it can make the Paladin really very reliable with its output. Or when you are instead caught in combat in a turn, you can use that save reroll to massively help against any big, low volume, scary attacks that might be threatening you. Because of course you don't have that in running combat, so rerolling your armor save can be a really good way to keep your Paladin alive. It also has a bondsman ability, as we said a lot of the big knights do, and the Paladin one is called Paladin's Duty. This allows you to pick an Armiger unit within 12 inches of it, and the chosen model gains lethal hits and lance. Obviously this helps the shooting of your Helverin's autocannons quite a lot with those lethal hits, but giving this to a charging Warglaive means it can be getting sustained hits, lance, and lethal hits on its chain cleaver, so that can be a huge boost to its output and let it wound most things on 2s or 3s at worst, and then do a load of damage from those sustained and lethal hits. So the Paladin is good. It's fairly run-of-the-mill. It's sort of this workhorse knight that can often get overlooked, but for the new 345 point cost, I think it's got a lot of potential just from its sheer reliability now. The Errant, on the other hand, is much more focused on anti-tank. We won't go over the weapons we've seen, such as the carapace options or the melee weapons, as this can again take a chainsword or a Thunderstrike gauntlet, but the Errant brings the thermal cannon instead of the battle cannon. This gun is only 24-inch range, so it's much shorter than the Paladin's, but it does have a very scary profile with 2d3 shots at strength 12, -4 AP and d6 damage, and it also has Melter 6 and Blast. So essentially, when you get to within 12 inches of an enemy with this gun, you will be throwing out some d6 plus 6 damage shooting, and with 2d3 shots, it can, on average, one-shot a Gladiator chassis or put around 10 or 11 wounds onto a Land Raider, with about a 30% chance of destroying it in one volley, which really isn't that bad for its 345 point cost. The Errant also gets +1 to hit when it shoots the closest eligible target, so making that melter even more reliable into any nearby tanks or monsters, and then in that same scenario, using the thermal cannon, that ups the chances of one-shotting a Land Raider to nearly 50%. So that is really quite a reasonable result. Equally like the Paladin, it has a Bondsman ability. This one gives the Armiger the ability to re-roll advance rolls and also gain the Assault rule. So it lets you get into a much better position with your Helverins, or just allowing your Warglaives to potentially get into melter range more easily. So it can be very, very handy. And just I think, like the Paladin, for 345 points, this is a very, very valid pick. It's got some great output at range and in melee, and it can just help a nearby Armiger get a bit more mobility and get into position a bit better, just to put even more melter damage potentially into an enemy, or just to get onto an objective and still not lose out on any shooting if it needs to advance to get onto it. From a couple of shooty knights to a more purely melee focused one now, the Knight Gallant also has had a drop in points, although only 35 points, it's down to 345 as well. The Gallant is, as I said, pure melee. It still has the carapace weapon options, but it just comes with a Thunderstrike Gauntlet and a Reaper Chainsword. You can't take anything else instead of those. Essentially, whenever you fight, you just have to choose which option you are going to go with. However, it does have a few extra changes to help it reach combat compared to the other Questorist patterns. It actually has a 12-inch move, so it's got 2 inches more than the other Questorist knights, and then in melee, its attacks are much, much better. The Chainsword is now 6 attacks at strength 14, minus 4 AP and 6 damage, or 18 attacks in the sweep profile, rather than the 4 or 12 that the other Questorist knights have. The Fist goes up from 4 or 8 attacks to a much healthier 6 or 12, and also all of its attacks hit on 2s. Essentially, the Gallant, when it charges in, can expect to kill about 4 Terminators with the Fist, or do over 20 damage to an enemy knight profile, so it is just exceptionally good at killing armor and monsters, and even into big hordes with your Chainsword sweep profile, you will be wiping out almost an entire 10-man Marine squad, pretty much guaranteed. The Gallant really is just a pure terrifying melee threat, but it can also be really quite durable in combat as well. The Martial Pride rule means that any enemy melee attacks into it are at -1 to hit, so even in combat with other big monsters or scary melee units, they are going to struggle to hit it, and then they're going to have to get through your Toughness 11, your 3-up save, to actually cause it any damage. So it can stick around for a good long while and just rip the enemy to pieces all game long. Its Bondsman ability, Gallant's Duty, gives an Armiger the ability to reroll charge rolls and also reroll hits in melee. So again, just bringing a huge buff to your Warglaives, making their sustained hits go even further and just getting them into combat much more reliably. So they really will do a good job of just charging in alongside your Gallant and killing any elite or light vehicles that they may be in combat with. From the Gallant, we move back to another all-rounder. This has got a bit more of an anti-infantry focus. The Knight Warden is actually one of my favourite knights because massive cool Gatling cannon. It is a bit pricier than the others at 365 points, but that is still a huge drop of 85 points from before, so it is very welcome. The Warden has the Avenger Gatling Cannon, which is an amazing 18-shot gun. It's strength 6, minus 2 AP and 2 damage, so it just excels at killing light and medium infantry. It alone will chew through a smaller 5-man Marine squad in a single volley, or kill off almost 10 Orc boys, so it is really great at thinning out those bigger squads. It also comes with a heavy flamer, which helps add even more anti-infantry firepower within 12 inches, so don't forget that. It is just even more firepower from this knight. It is just a really solid way to help your other knights avoid getting bogged down or blocked by massive units of 20 guardsmen and the like. The Warden also gets a fantastic rule in Thin Their Ranks, which gives it devastating wounds on its shooting if it targets any non-monster or non-vehicle units, so making it even have extra potential into those tougher infantry units. Things like Terminators or Custodes will actually go down a lot quicker than you would think, thanks to those devastating wounds into them. The Bondsman ability, Warden's Duty, is also a really strong one. It gives the effective Armiger -1 to incoming damage, so it's a really strong durability boost. This was even better when the Bondsman abilities also affected the knights as well, like they did at the start of the edition. It's a shame that's gone, but kind of understandable. -1 to incoming damage on a big Questoris chassis was incredibly good, but even on just an Armiger, with their now increased wound pool, this can go a long way to helping them stick around for much longer. If instead of the melee prowess of the Gallant you just want a pure shooty version, then the Crusader is the next of the Questor Knights that you might want to look at. This guy is also a bit pricier than some of the other patterns, being 365 points, but like the Warden, that is still a huge decrease, dropping 80 points from before. The Crusader has awful melee. It's only got 4 strength 8 attacks that are -1 AP and 2 damage. Instead, this thing focuses all on shooting. It comes with the Avenger Gatling Cannon and then can take either a thermal cannon or a rapid fire battle cannon, whichever you prefer. So it has some brilliant anti-infantry, and then you can shore it up with either more anti-elite, anti-light vehicle shots, or some solid anti-tank punch from the melter option. Personally, I quite like this guy just sitting back at 36 inches with the battle cannon and the Gatling cannon to just wipe out swathes of infantry and go into some lighter vehicles when they get into range. But the thermal cannon is still a very good option. It lets you fire at both infantry and big tanks at the same time and just try to maximize how much of the enemy army you will be killing. The Crusader is helped with this output by the Punishing Salvos rule, which gives the knight sustained hits 1 if it has stayed still in your movement phase, and this is a huge boost to all of your guns. Thermal cannons with extra hits on 6s is really scary, but equally, with just the sheer number of shots, the Gatling cannon and the battle cannon can just rip through units so quickly with that buff. Crusader's duty is the Bondsman ability. This one gives a chosen Armiger +1 to hit with ranged attacks, so letting your Helverins hit on 2s, but even handy on your Warglaives with the thermal spears, getting that much more reliability with the +1 to hit. So it is a very good Bondsman ability, and a Crusader with 2 Helverins nearby and the Mythic Hero Enhancement can get you a load of very accurate, very scary shooting into your opponent. The final of the non-named Questor Knights, from the main index at least, is the Knight Preceptor. This guy is sort of a leader to your other knights in the lore. It's a bit of a veteran pilot, and the Preceptor is the cheapest option at 335 points and has got a brand new weapon, the Las Impulsor. This gun it's okay. It can either fire D6 strength 14 shots with -3 AP and 4 damage, or go for a low intensity shot, which is 2d6 shots at strength 7, -1 AP and 2 damage. Now, both options have blast, so it can still be good into bigger squads and that sort of thing, but it's essentially sort of this in-between between the thermal spear and the battle cannon, although I would say not quite as good as either separately. It's more if you want the option for some reasonable shooting into enemy elites or vehicles and don't just want to focus purely on, say, the Errant or the Warden. To me, though, it just feels like it lacks some focus, which for the Knights especially is really important. But it's not all bad. The Preceptor does have Exemplar of the Code, which is its rule, giving it full rerolls to hit against an enemy unit that you choose at the start of the battle. So you can pick a scary enemy unit and get a lot more reliability into it from this unit, which is pretty great. And then you also get the Mentor Bondsman ability, which allows you to improve the leadership of your chosen Armiger by 1 and also their OC by 2. So this can actually be a bit more useful now that your OC has dropped on your Armigers, getting them either back up to 8 or even back up to 5 when they are injured. So that could make a bit of a difference. But in general, the Preceptors just don't feel like the best pick to me. They are the cheapest option, which is nice, but unless you really want to help buff your Armigers and you really don't know what the enemy is going to be bringing model-wise, I would say just going for an ever so slightly pricier Errant or Warden or Paladin is probably going to be the better option most of the time. Now, that isn't all for the Knights. We do have 2 even bigger variants in the Dominus class chassis. These are slower still with only an 8-inch move. They have also dropped to toughness, but they are still toughness 12, which is a decent breakpoint for a lot of guns. They did, however, get a fairly hefty durability drop. They've gone down to just a 3-up save instead of their old 2-up, which is a big deal for them. To counter this though, they did gain 4 extra wounds, so they've got a nice bump up to 28. They can definitely stick around for a good long while, but as I said, that loss of the 2-up save really does hurt them. And we start with the Castellan. This is actually only 395 points now, so this is where the loss of the 2-up save is balanced out. That is a drop of 115 points from its old 510 points, which is huge. You essentially get almost an entire extra Armiger from this points drop. And the Castellan comes with the Plasma Decimator and the Volcano Lance, and then each Dominus chassis gets Shield Breaker missiles, 2 twin melter guns, and a Siege Breaker cannon. The melter guns are twin-linked melter guns. The Siege Breaker cannon is D6 shots at strength 6, no AP, and 1 damage, whilst the Shield Breaker missiles are actually pretty scary against other knights. They're only 1 shot, but they're strength 12 minus 6 AP, and D6 plus 1 damage with dev wounds. They also have anti-titanic 4+, so they can do quite a bit of work into bigger knights and even titans if you do come up against them. In terms of the Castellan's actual main weapons though, the Plasma Decimator is either D6 plus 3 shots at strength 8 minus 2 AP and 2 damage, or you can supercharge it and get it up to strength 9 minus 3 AP and 3 damage. It's not bad, although for the size of the gun, I would have expected it to be a bit more strength or damage. Personally, the fact that it's only 1 strength and damage more than just a standard plasma gun is weird, but it does have a good number of shots, and with Blast on it, it can actually kill off things like Marines really, really well, even if you don't supercharge it. The Volcano Lance, of course, is just pure anti-armor. It's D3 shots, but it's strength 18, minus 5 AP, and D6 plus 8 damage, so this thing really will threaten vehicles. It does also have Blast, so it can go into things like 10-man blobs of Terminators and such in a pinch, but really you want this thing shooting at tanks and vehicles and monsters. I kind of wish it hit on 2s or had a few more reliable shots than just D3, because that is its big downfall. On average, this gun will only just manage to kill a Gladiator tank, and it actually only has a 20% chance of one-shotting an enemy Land Raider, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, that isn't awful, but I just feel it's not quite as scary as maybe the fact that it's a volcano weapon makes it sound. I think the big thing about this gun is that with D6 plus 8 damage, it is a huge threat, and that alone can make enemies scared to put enemies in line of sight of it, and with a 72-inch threat range on this, you can use it to just threaten huge swathes of the table and try and stop the enemy from moving around in them, because they won't want you to get line of sight on their precious tanks. So you can use it as a really good way to control the enemy and just slow them down if nothing else. The Castellan also has 2 rules. One of them is Iron Aegis. This gives nearby armigers within 6 inches the benefits of cover, so that's really good with their 3-up save. It can help them to endure just a bit more shooting as they are sat around supporting your Castellan. And then Titan Hunter allows you to re-roll damage rolls of 1 against monsters and vehicles. So that does actually add a good bit of reliability to your Volcano Lance. Yes, it's already a flat 8 damage, but the D6 can be swingy, and on the turns when you do get a wound through, you want to be doing as much damage as possible, so being able to re-roll that 1 or 2 if you roll it is a big, big deal. The Valiant is also much cheaper now at the same 395 points, but has some very different weapons to the Castellan. It comes with the Conflagration Cannon for 3d6 auto-hitting shots at 18 inches. It is a super good flamer that is strength 8, minus 1 AP and 2 damage, so it will do some hilariously good work into big units and even things like Marines. It alone kills about 10 orc boys, so if you've got a big unit trying to block your path, you can just light them up and they will be dealt with. It also has the Thundercoil Harpoon, which is absolutely absurdly fun, if a little bit unreliable. It's only 1 shot at 18 inches, it's strength 24, minus 6 AP, and a flat 12 damage. It also hits on 2s and has anti-monster and anti-vehicle 4+, and devastating wounds. So this thing is definitely worth keeping your army reroll for, because when you do get a hit through, you really want the wound to go through, because it can easily one-shot an enemy tank. Assuming you keep the reroll for the wound, you've got around an 80% chance of just insta-killing something like a Marine Predator, so it is really dangerous, and it is something your opponent will absolutely do everything in their power to avoid with their monsters and vehicles. The Valiant also has the Iron Aegis rule, giving nearby armigers that nice cover bonus, but then it also brings Overwhelming Firestorm. This lets you pick an enemy unit hit by your Valiant, and they have to take a Battle Shock test. It's not the most amazing ability, but it can let you potentially kill off a load of infantry with the Conflagration Cannon, and then force a Battle Shock test onto them to make them much less effective if you are then planning to charge another unit into them, for instance. So it's not great, but it does potentially have some nice combo play with your guns on the Valiant. The final datasheet in the actual main index is Canis Rex, the named character and basically must take in the book. Canis is 380 points, so he is still expensive, but he has dropped a massive 70 points from before. He's got a 10-inch move, toughness 11, 26 wounds, and a 3-up save. He is the standard Questoris profile, but he does have some amazingly strong rules. He's got his own version of the Las Impulsor, essentially being a Knight Preceptor. It's the same dual profile with Strength 14, minus 3 AP and 4 damage, or Strength 7, minus 1 AP and 2 damage, but it is also sustained hits 1, so it does make it quite a lot better. He also hits on 2s, which makes him a lot more reliable all round, and it does actually turn it into quite a scary weapon with those bonuses. On top of that, he's also got a multi-laser, which is kind of hilarious. It's pretty awful, but 4 extra strength 6 shots is, I guess, not nothing. Canis also comes equipped for melee incredibly well. His own version of the Thunderstrike Gauntlet, called Freedom's Hand, also has sustained hits, so it is incredibly strong, throwing out either 5 strength 20 attacks at minus 3 AP and 9 damage, or 10 strength 10 attacks at minus 2 AP and 3 damage. But what makes his attacks both melee and ranged even better is his rule Chainbreaker. This means he scores critical hits on 5s or 6s instead of just 6s. So all of those 5s and 6s will be extra hits for him. And as I said, this is both ranged and melee. Essentially, that means he can quite reliably wipe out a 5-man unit of Terminators by himself. And his shooting is actually fairly solid now with all those extra hits. Into the Marines, the low intensity blast will kill about 3 to 4, whilst the high intensity option can do around 9 damage to an enemy gladiator. So it is actually really quite effective before you even charge him into combat. He also gets Legendary Freeblade, which allows him once per turn to target himself with a stratagem for 0 command points, so he gets a load of extra command point utility, which can just be amazing for keeping him alive or just getting the most damage out of him for a turn. He is just all round incredibly solid for his cost, and even then when Canis Rex is destroyed, he actually gets out, the pilot gets out, and you get this cheeky little Sir Hector model to play with. He's only toughness 3 with 3 wounds and a 4-up save, but it does mean you can hide him, and as Canis Rex isn't considered destroyed until Sir Hector is, that can potentially save you from giving the opponent some secondary points, or just be this really annoying, sneaky little objective holding unit for the rest of the battle as the enemy tries to find him and get a line of sight on him. So those are the big knights from the index, but as mentioned, we still aren't finished yet because there is an entire other set of knights to look through, which are from the Imperial Armor book. There is some worry amongst players that these will be sent to Legends one day, but certainly for 10th edition they look to be safe, and personally I can't imagine they'll be going anywhere in 11th edition either. So I do think if you want some of these knights, certainly the Cerastus pattern, they are still a very good, safe option to pick up now. Starting off, we have the huge Knight Asterius. This is one of the biggest knights going and is essentially a mini Titan. It is a whopping 765 points, so it's very hard to fit into most armies, but it's got an incredibly good toughness 13 profile with a 2-up save, a 5-up invuln, and 30 wounds. The Asterius is a pure shooting knight with 2 Volkite Culverins, a Karaknos mortar battery, and then 2 twin conversion beam cannons, so it can shoot very, very well. The Volkite Culverins are 6 shots each at strength 6, 0 AP and 2 damage, so nothing amazing, but they do of course have dev wounds, so they can do a bit more than you might expect. The main output is from the mortar battery and the conversion beam cannons. The mortar battery is an indirect fire 48-inch range with d6 plus 3 shot weapon. It's only strength 6 minus 1 AP and 1 damage, but it does have anti-infantry 2+ and ignores cover, so it can get units out of terrain quite nicely and quickly and then free up objectives in the enemy backfield that they thought were safe. But the main output is the 2 big guns. Each of these is 3 shots at strength 16 minus 2 AP, 6 damage with twin linked and sustained hits d3. And of course the conversion rule, which gives you critical hits on a 4+ if the target is over 24 inches away, essentially meaning the 2 cannons can put out up to a maximum of 12 shots, which is more than enough to kill most targets with that flat 6 damage. Asterius also has the Sunderer of Fortresses rule, meaning every time it targets a vehicle you get +1 strength and damage, or +2 to those stats if you target a fortification. And what that means is that against vehicles you can be strength 17 and a flat 7 damage, which is amazingly strong and will let you pretty reliably one-shot a Land Raider if you are within 24 inches. So it's a very, very expensive but very strong shooty knight to consider. I personally think the Porphyrion is slightly better and cooler, but he is also expensive. He's only 700 points though, so he is a bit cheaper. He's also had a point drop of a whopping 10 whole points. But the Porphyrion is at the same toughness 13 stat line with 30 wounds. It does have a slightly different rule in Bastion of Firepower, which gives it lethal hits if it's remained stationary, and it still has a huge wide scope of ranged weapons. It's got 2 Acastus autocannons giving you 4 strength 9 -1 AP 3 damage shots, an Iron Storm missile pod which fires d6 plus 6 shots at strength 5, no AP and 1 damage but with indirect fire, so also quite nice for clearing out enemy units on backfield objectives. And then before we get to the big guns, you can also do a few weapon swaps with this. You can swap the autocannons for las cannons or the Iron Storm missile pod for Helios defense missiles. This instead gets you 3 strength 10 -2 AP d6 damage shots with anti-fly 2+. So that is actually a quite nice bit of extra anti-tank and anti-flyer output. But the main guns though, these are the Magna las cannons. Each of these is d6 shots with blast at strength 18, -4 AP, and d6 plus 6 damage with twin linked. So both of these will be easily capable of one-shotting a Land Raider at about a 90% success rate, and even if you decide to fire them separately at 2 separate targets, you've got about a 70% chance of taking out 2 Gladiator tanks. So they really are fantastic weapons. It is very, very easy to just sit back and threaten huge parts of the enemy army with this knight. And with blast, even into some less optimal targets, they can do good work if you really have no better threats in line of sight, just from the number of shots they can put out. From the Acastus Knights though, we go to the Cerastus chassis. These guys are much bigger than your standard Questoris Knights, and they are generally a little bit pricier, although they have equally had quite a big points drop lately. The Lancer is probably the best melee knight in the game, I would say. It's got a whopping 14-inch move, toughness 11, 28 wounds, 3-up save, and a 4-up invuln that works against ranged and melee. The Lancer is 365 points, so it's only 20 points more than the Gallant, and in my opinion, it is just generally better in almost every way. The shooting is admittedly pretty mediocre. It's only 6 shots at strength 6, no AP, and 2 damage with sustained hits 2, but in melee it's got a shock lance which is absolutely brutal. 5 attacks at strength 20, -3 AP, 8 damage, and lance means it will be wounding pretty much anything in the game short of a Titan on 2s, and then the sweep profile is also fairly good, 10 attacks at strength 10, -2 AP, and 3 damage. The Lancer can also advance and still charge, giving you a possible 32-inch threat range, and it can also tank shock for 0 command points. So even before you fight, this guy can pop out a good chunk of mortal wounds onto an enemy, and in terms of overall output, if you charge in with the Lancer, it can do about 14 wounds to a Wraith Knight, killing it outright 23% of the time, but even then if you don't, with the tank shock stratagem on top, you can very, very easily one-shot a Wraith Knight with that combination. So it's incredibly scary. It's just super fast, super deadly, and it's also really quite durable with those 28 wounds, backed up by the 4-up invulnerable save. The Castigator is kind of the Cerastus version of the Knight Warden, again sporting a nicer 12-inch move, but with the same toughness 11, 3-up save, and 5-up invulnerable. It does also have 28 wounds, so it's a tiny bit more durable than the Questoris chassis. And then in terms of its output, it's got the Castigator bolt cannon. This is kind of like the Gatling cannon. It's 18 shots that are also strength 6, -2 AP, and 2 damage. But this time they gain twin linked as well, so making them really, really scary into anything from guardsmen to marines to orcs, you will on average kill about 7 or 8 Marines with this. And then when you get into melee, you have what is called the Tempest Warblade. It is essentially just the same as the Reaper Chainsword. It's either 4 strength 14 attacks at -4 AP and 6 damage, or a sweep profile with 12 attacks at strength 9, -3 AP and 2 damage. So it's still plenty scary into most targets, but really this is a bit more of a shooty knight, I think. The Castigator also has a Bondsman ability, giving a nearby Armiger sustained hits 1 and +1 AP on its ranged weapons, so making things like your Helverins very, very good with their 8 shots. Going to AP2 is a huge improvement against most targets. And then it also has its own rule, Storm of Bolts, which lets you suppress an enemy unit that you shoot at. So you get to pick a non-monster, non-vehicle unit that you hit with your bolt cannon, and they are at -1 to hit until your next turn. So not only is it quite killy against infantry, but it can also do a really good job of boosting your army's durability as well by impacting how well the enemy can return fire. So it is just a great all-rounder, and with that 100 point drop down to 365 points, I think it's actually well worth considering over the Warden at times. Another infantry-style knight is the Cerastus Knight Acheron. Likewise, 12-inch move, toughness 11, 28 wound profile. The Acheron has the flame cannon, which is sort of like the Valiant, but slightly worse. It's only 2d6 shots and still strength 8, -1 AP and 2 damage. It does also have a heavy bolter, which is cute, but nothing super exciting. And then again, the melee profile is essentially just the chainsword, 4 strength 14 attacks at -4 AP and 6 damage, or 12 at strength 9, -3 AP and 2 damage. It just, to me, doesn't really feel as good as some of the other options. When you consider it's still 365 points, the Flamer, yes, it's nice being Torrent, but even then you're only looking at 2 to 3 dead Marines from it, which really isn't that impressive. It does have an okay Bondsman ability with Acheron's Duty, which lets an Armiger force a battle shock test on an enemy at -1 to the roll at the start of the fight phase, so that can impact things like a potential interrupt or another strat that they might have been planning to play, but it's far from the best Bondsman ability. And then the Acheron's own rule is Searing Flames, which removes the benefit of cover from an enemy unit that you shoot at with your flame cannon, so it can help your army do a bit of extra damage to an enemy unit. But I just think for 365 points, I would much rather be taking a Castigator or a Lancer, or even one of the Questoris patterns instead. And I think, the Valiant is only 30 points more than this, and in my opinion, is infinitely better. The last Cerastus option is the Knight Atrapos. I love this model, I've wanted it for ages, and it's a shame it's not in plastic yet, because if it was, I would absolutely go and buy one. The Atrapos, again, is 365 points, but it does have some very unique and interesting weapons. It's fairly good in both melee and ranged, and it has an Atrapos Lascutter and a Graviton Singularity Cannon. The Lascutter is sort of like the Preceptor's Las Impulsor. It's either D6, strength 14, -3 AP, 4 damage shots with sustained hits 1, or 2d6, strength 7, -1 AP, 2 damage shots, also with sustained hits. So nothing super amazing, but better than the Preceptor's version. The Lascutter is also its melee weapon, and it can be a fairly good melee threat. It's got the same profile in combat, so 6 attacks at strength 14 with sustained hits 1 and 4 damage, or a sweep profile with 12 attacks at strength 7 and 2 damage, which isn't arguably as good as things like the chainsword, but it's still not an awful profile, I don't think. The other ranged option it has, though, is the Graviton Cannon. This is a 24-inch range gun with 2 profiles. It's either D3 shots at strength 16, -4 AP and D6 +1 damage, or you can fire it in the Singularity version, which is the same profile, but it has devastating wounds. So you can actually do quite a bit of scary damage from this gun. The weapons are good, I think, but they're certainly not as good as some of the other options that we see in other knights. I think what makes the Atrapos good is it has a few really nice rules. The Macro Extinction Protocols gives it +1 to hit against monsters and vehicles, so it can be hitting on 2s in both ranged and melee. And then against Titanic units, you get +1 to wound as well. So against enemy knights and that sort of thing, the Atrapos can be very, very strong. It does about 17 damage to an enemy Imperial Knight, so it can do a lot of work if your opponent is bringing those units. It's also got a fairly good bondsman rule. It gives an Armiger reroll hit rolls and wound rolls against titanic or towering targets, so making things like your thermal spear attacks much scarier into any other enemy knights. And generally, I just think the Atrapos, it's more of an anti-knight knight. So if you are up against any armies that are bringing titanic units like enemy knights, chaos knights, or even Eldari with some wraith knights and that sort of thing, this could be worthwhile just to help you try and deal with those. The final few datasheets in Imperial armor are made up of 2 more Questoris knights. The Magaera is 355 points and is the standard Questoris profile, T11, 26 wounds, 10-inch move with a 3-up save. It can take a Reaper Chainsword, but it also has a new melee option in the Hecaton Siege Claw. This is pretty much the same as the Thunderstrike Gauntlet. It brings you 4 Strength 20 attacks, which are 8 damage each, or 8 Strength 10 attacks, which are 3 damage. It does also come with an inbuilt ranged weapon in the Rad Cleanser, which gives you D6 shots at 12 inches. They auto hit and they are twin linked, but they are only Strength 2, no AP and 1 damage, which sounds awful, but it is anti-infantry 2+, so it actually does wound infantry quite well. It's still not going to do a huge amount with no AP and only 1 damage, but it is definitely something extra to remember. The main options for it in terms of ranged output are the Phased Plasma Fusil and the Lightning Cannon. The Plasma Fusil is 2 shots at 24 inches with Rapid Fire 2, and it is Strength 8 minus 3 AP and 2 damage, so it is essentially a nice overcharged plasma with no hazardous, which is handy. But then its main gun is the Lightning Cannon. This is sustained hits 2, which is very nice, and has a whopping 12 shots, but it is only Strength 9, no AP, and 2 damage, so you can get a lot of hits from it, but then you are relying on the enemy to fail some saves to get any damage through. All told, it kills about 3 Marines in one volley, so it's not nothing, but equally, it's definitely not as good as some of the guns that the other Questoris Knights have. Lastly, the Magaera also does have a bondsman ability. It lets an Armiger gain +1 strength and AP against the closest target it shoots at. This isn't bad, getting something like a Helverin to strength 10 and -2 AP, or the Thermal Spear to strength 13 and -5 AP can make it, if nothing else, much scarier into something like a Land Raider. And then it also has its own datasheet rule in Repair Auto Simulacra. This lets the Magaera heal D3 at the end of your command phase. So it's not the most killy knight, but it can buff Armigers relatively well, and it is quite tanky with that heal. The other option is the Knight Styrix. This is also 355 points, and it does have the same melee options. On the range front, however, it has the Graviton Crusher and the Volkite Chirovile as its main gun. The Volkite is 12 shots at 30 inches, it's strength 12, no AP and 3 damage, and it does have dev wounds, so it can be really quite good into things like Terminators and Custodes with their 3 wounds. It kills off about 2 Custodes in one volley. And then the Graviton Crusher throws 3 extra shots at strength 6, -1 AP and 2 damage, but it does have anti-vehicle 2+, so it can actually chip off wounds from tanks quite well as you're moving up the board. It's probably not as good as some other Questoris patterns, I don't think, but if you do like doing dev wounds, then the Volkite can be quite fun to use. The Bondsman ability lets the Armiger chosen force a battle shock test on an enemy unit it's shot or fought into, which is cute, but again, nothing super spectacular. And then it has a rule called Gravpin, which lets the Styrix pick an enemy unit it's shot at with the Graviton Crusher, and it is -2 to its movement and charge rolls until the end of the opponent's next turn. This sounds like a great rule, but it is only an enemy infantry unit, so if you do this, you are not shooting at the target you probably want to, which is a vehicle thanks to the anti-vehicle 2+ rule, so it can be a bit counterintuitive, but if you really need to stop a potential charge coming in, this can massively reduce an enemy infantry unit's charge or threat range. The final option is the 150-point Armiger Moirax. Also dropping down to toughness 9 like the other Armigers, the Moirax has a fairly scary mix of melee and ranged options. It's got 4 strength 12, -3 AP, D6 +2 damage attacks from the Siege Claw, or you can instead kit it out for pure range. It comes with a Volkite View Glare. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but a Volkite weapon and a Graviton Pulsar. The Volkite is 4 attacks at strength 8, no AP and 2 damage with dev wounds as you would expect, whilst the Graviton is d6 shots at strength 7, minus 1 AP, 2 damage with anti-vehicle 2+. You can also instead choose to take a Conversion Beam Cannon, which is 1 strength 10, minus 2 AP, 3 damage attack with sustained hits d3, or a Lightning Lock for some more anti-chaff output with 6 strength 8, no AP, 1 damage shots with sustained hits 2. And you can mix and match to kind of get what you want. Overall, they do have a very nice wide selection of choices. I would personally consider going for maybe 2 Lightning Locks if you wanted to just go against an army like Nids or Orcs where they're going to have a load of models on the table that you want to get rid of. Or a nice mix could be something like the Siege Claw and the Volkites, for instance, just to get you a bit of shooting and a bit of combat potential as you get up the board. And you do probably want this guy getting up into combat because it does also have a nice rule in Protection Protocols, which allows it to heroically intervene for 0 command points. So with that Siege Claw, it can actually be quite a scary defensive threat for one of your bigger knights nearby as well. And after all that is the Imperial Knights, their index and also their Imperial armor. As I said, they are getting a new codex eventually, but I think it is still a good few months away. So I just wanted to go through the units as they are now, especially since we got that index update a couple of days ago, and just see what they can do. But as always, I'd really love to know your thoughts on the army, what you would love to see in the new codex, and also which of the knights you think is best to take as it stands right now. Let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later guys.